welcome to the Chocolate Extravaganza. This has been, we were just talking, this is our 6th anniversary of having Courtney a part of our family here at Orson Gigi. On a whim and a hope and a prayer, I reached out 6 years ago and just said, hey, would you be willing to like maybe come teach a class? We've got this chocolate event. I see all the beautiful cakes that you do. I don't know if you do anything chocolate. And she was like, boy, do I ever. The most amazing chocolate cake. She's like, I just developed it for high altitude. Let's do this. And our minds were blown. This was like when cupcakes were the thing. You were going to every wedding and there were cupcakes everywhere. And I was like, if I have to eat another cupcake, I'm going to scream. And I was so grateful for someone to come in and give us delicious, beautiful cake that has just completely been a part of every single one of our celebrations. My son's birthday is tomorrow, and he was like, I want Courtney's chocolate cake, which in my family is a big deal. Yeah. We are not big cake or chocolate eaters with my kids. They would take a gummy any day, and I'm like, I'll take the chocolate, you take the gummies. But they will, he said, I want chocolate cake. So I was like, I can't let him down.
No.
It's Ollie. I
yes.
can't let him down.
Oh, we can't let Ollie down. The other 3 we could let down in the family. We're fine.
The other 3 can do
not Ollie.
No, he's the youngest.
He's our favorite.
But we have loved watching Courtney just jump into all of your hearts and your kitchens as well through her Instagram, also her new cookbook, and just helping you guys celebrate through cake. We often just think that every occasion together belongs with cake, and so it's fun to see what you guys do. We hold her hands-on classes here, and it's so amazing to hear your guys' stories, how you connect with your families, and how cake has been a part of all of your lives. And so we're just glad that Courtney is back, and we had to move it to Thursday. This is really why we added Thursday, because she's got a race this weekend. And I was like, we are not missing your race.
No, I would have canceled the extravaganza.
That.
Yeah, it worked out perfectly.
So thanks for joining us on a Thursday. You guys are in for a treat. This is her Twix cake, which has lots more elements than sometimes what we're used to doing in here. And so if you've had some finicky results with the softer buttercream, she's going to walk through that with you. But then, of course, all the different things that go inside the layers is what makes this so fun and special. So thank you for joining us, and Courtney and Avery.
And this
thank
is
you
my
for
Avery
being here.
She's been to a couple of these now. I think I've got some pictures with her standing right up here since the time that we started. So this is fun. Happy 6 years, by the way.
And it wouldn't be the same without family. So
right,
this is it.
right.
So.
We're in the kitchen together always. We were listening to a song on the way up called "Dancing in the Kitchen." And she's like, Mom, this is like our song, because this is what we do. And I was like, it is what we do. We do everything in the kitchen. And I think that's why Heather and I just like connected and clicked so quickly, like soulmates almost, where it's just, we have the same feelings about family and values and the kitchen and what being in the home and spending time in the kitchen does for, not just for us individually, but for our families, for our friends, the people that we're with, and the memories that can be created there, and just kind of that special, happy, joyful, sacred place that becomes. And so, anyway, we dance in the kitchen, huh? Even when we lose our food wars, we're still dancing. She's like, Mom, don't dance right now. She's actually our dancer, and so she teaches us. Weston pretends, and then Ryan. Okay, so this is so fun. Okay, we are doing. I wish we had a picture of the first cake we did for our chocolate festival.
I'm going to post it on our Instagram.
Okay.
So
it was, I don't know what. I put donuts on the top of it.
It was a stick. It was fun.
It was wild. We've come a long ways. But for so many years, we did do my dark chocolate cake. Has anyone made that one? It is in a lot of my recipes. It's my favorite, is my go-to. It's a rich dark chocolate flavor. The one we're doing today is actually more of a milk chocolate cake to go in the Twix cake layers. So I just wanted to talk about the difference of those two really quick, and also talk about cocoa powder and the chocolate we're putting into our cakes and our buttercream, because that's going to be such a game changer in the flavor of the elements that you are making when you're making a cake. So no matter what, even when I call it a milk chocolate cake, I'm using the cacao berry extra brut cocoa powder. So that is a really rich dark chocolate. We can probably grab a bag so you guys can see it, but I always grab it here. Whitney, right as she's about to sit down. Okay, that's my cue. She's gonna grab us the bag. It's my absolute favorite. I love a Valrhona too, but this one has just been my go-to from day one. I read about it through another baker years ago. I mean, 10 years ago probably. And my first cake actually was 13 years ago. this December for my son's first birthday. And I love hearing how many people are like, okay, I decided to make a cake because it was my son or daughter's first birthday. Or how special is this too? We had a woman come into our cake class not too long ago. Heather was there. Carla, I'm not sure if you were there that night. This woman who was probably a little bit older, and it was the first time she'd ever made a cake from scratch. And she definitely didn't have a 1-year-old at home anymore. At least I don't think so. And so at the end we got to talking, and she was like, this was so fun. It's the first time I've made a cake from scratch, and I've done, everything here. And I said, that is so neat. And she's like, it's my husband's wish. He has not got much time left. And he said, before I go, can you make me a birthday cake from scratch? And so here she was, like doing this one thing for her husband. It was so sweet because I have so many young moms like, oh, I'm going to do this for my kids' birthdays. I'm going to learn to do this. Or we're going through something mentally, emotionally, physically, and just kind of escaping in the kitchen and baking can help us through that. And here she was with the love of her life saying, okay, let me just do this one last thing for you. And it was cake. It was just making a cake from scratch. But it was so special to her, and it was so special to me, and I hope to him as well. So anyway, I don't know how I got on that tangent, just that birthday cakes are fun. And that's when I learned about the cocoa powder. Was about 10 years ago. I've used it ever since, is this dark cocoa powder. So when we're looking at our cocoa powder, one thing I want you to think of, one is I want you to stay open-minded to dark chocolate. Who loves a milk chocolate? We can still be friends, it's fine, but okay, we just gotta know who loves the milk chocolate, because I gotta change your mind about using dark chocolate in your baked goods, okay? Because I want you to think for a minute. If we're starting with a milk chocolate chip or just a regular cocoa powder, think about all the other ingredients we're adding. We've got sugar, flour, buttermilk, butter, all these other things that are going in that are diluting that chocolate flavor. Same in your buttercream. If you're gonna start with a milk chocolate chip, well then once we add our powdered sugar, our butter, our heavy cream, you're diluting that chocolate flavor. If we're gonna start though with a dark chocolate that is full of that rich, beautiful chocolate flavor, yes, it's bittersweet to begin with, but once we add all these other ingredients, guess what? It's not like biting into a dark chocolate bar. It just becomes really rich in flavor with the chocolate, but it's also sweet, like you may like with the milk chocolate. So with my buttercream, I'm always using a dark chocolate, or you could do a semi-sweet. And with my cakes, I'm always looking for a dark cocoa powder. Now there is some differences with your dark cocoa powder. If you were to just pick up Hershey's from the grocery store, even their dark cocoa powder, you'll notice a color difference. It's a little bit grayer, a little bit lighter. This one, like really dark, you can just smell kind of the richness of it. But if you compared fat content and cocoa powder, which I don't think we normally think of, right? That cocoa powder has fat? Well, it does. And we want a higher fat in our cocoa powder with a brand like the Calibo, because that increases and helps retain moisture. We want fat in our cakes. That's where the moisture is coming from. So if you're gonna use a less quality brand or just one that has less fat, you'll notice because your cake might come out a little drier. And we've tested and played around. I know Hershey's makes that dark cocoa, and I've used it when I've been in a pinch. I just know I need to add a little more fat elsewhere in the cake. Maybe an extra egg yolk, maybe a little sour cream, and I may not have quite the richness of flavor in the cake layers. Now in my dark chocolate cake, which is just like, it's our favorite, right? Don't we love that one, Carlisle? So good, it's really rich, really moist. This one, we're using this same dark cocoa powder, but we're doing a different type of cake. And so this one's a butter-based cake, whereas my other one, that dark chocolate that looks really black in color, has got more liquid in it, and we're using oil in that one. And so for this one, to get that more milk chocolate flavor, but using our rich dark chocolate, we're using butter to start with. We've got some sugar. I've got some brown sugar in this one as well to just kind of create that milk chocolate flavor without it being like overly sweet and while still having the chocolate. Are we all following? Okay, so dark chocolate. Courtney, I promise I'll try dark chocolate. Just in your baked goods, okay? I've like ruined my kids because they only love dark chocolate. And we were in Park City doing the Alpine slides one time, and Avery went into the little cafe to get a snack. And she's like, where's the dark chocolate? There's milk chocolate Hershey's bars. Where's the dark chocolate? Like that is, she was just looking for the dark chocolate. I was like, so proud of you right now. Anyway, so that's where we are in our family. Okay, let's talk quickly a couple tips for your cake layers and your buttercream. And then I want to get to the decorating and show you this, and we'll talk about the buttercream too. So, first of all, when you're making your cake layers, plan ahead. Get those ingredients that come from the fridge out on your counter well in advance so they get to room temperature. And it may, especially in the wintertime, you're like, oh, they've been on the counter for like 2 hours, they should be good to go. I want you to touch them. If they are cold, do not use them yet. We want totally room temperature. Those room temperature ingredients that come from your fridge, so buttermilk, milk, eggs, yogurt, sour cream, anything from the fridge going into your cake, those should be room temperature because they'll better blend together, right? Those beginning stages of creaming the butter and the sugar and the eggs, everything should be really smooth and silky. There should be no clumps of butter, right? We want those ingredients to really mix well together. More importantly, your dry ingredients that have your leavening agents better absorb the wet ingredients when they are room temperature, and that gets your cake to rise so much higher. So I did a comparison because I love a visual, and I have it on my reels a couple times. I think I've posted it a few times so that you can see the difference. I did one batch of cake with cold ingredients and one batch with room temperature. And the height difference, I had an extra like half of the cake on the one with room temperature because that's just gonna rise really well. So don't skip that process. If you need to speed it up, get a bowl of warm water and then put your eggs in that. Don't crack them yet, but put your eggs in there, okay? And then same thing with your buttermilk or sour cream. Put it in a bowl and then put that in a bowl of warmer water, and that will help it get to room temperature. But it's so important. If your cakes are coming out dense and they're not rising, that could be a big thing that you're missing. All right, baking powder, baking soda, those expire. I say give them 6 months and then you gotta toss them and get the new ones, okay? Now, your ovens. Who loves their oven? Who hates the oven? It's like sometimes a love-hate relationship as we get to know our oven, especially with our baked goods, right? So your job when you go home and from here on out is to like develop a relationship with your oven. I want you to stand close to it. I want you to watch it as things are baking. I bake a lot of cakes. I still, at the end, I'm like, oh, I've got 3 minutes, and I'm just like, light on, hanging out. I'm still watching my cakes just to make sure everything is going the way it's supposed to. I also know my oven well enough that if I put 3 cake pans in, the one in the back comes out 3 minutes before these two. It's just a little hotter back there. You could rotate your pans, but you don't need to do that before about 75% of the bake time has passed. Don't be opening the oven too much. But like one time if you need to at the end, or I just take that one pan out, push the other 2 back into the middle, give them 3 more minutes, and we're good to go. You want to preheat your oven for about 30 minutes before you put your baked goods in there. Have you guys heard me say this yet? Okay, this is a big one too. And I love to compare it to when you're making pancakes. This is a good visual. So I want you to think about your pancakes and you're at the griddle, okay? And you put your first set and you flip them. They're kind of splotchy, right? Like color-wise, not totally even. Then you get halfway through the batter, all the way through the batter. This is the one time like as a mom where I'm like, I'll eat last. Because I know the pancakes at the very end rise the best and they look the best. They're like, the color's totally even, they have a better rise than the ones at the beginning. Your griddle, even though you knew it was hot because you splashed it with water and it sizzled, it wasn't really filled with heat like it is towards the end. It's had that extra tap. So your oven is the same way. Give it about 30 minutes to preheat. So it really fills that oven with all that heat, okay? I'm not using convection, just FYI. I'm using conventional setting. So our regular bake setting, I'm always baking on the middle rack, and you have about 1 inch at least between your pans. You don't want them touching. We need some flow. We need some space for the heat to flow and just to move around. Even without the fan, that heat is still moving. All right, that fan with the convection just tends to dry our cakes out a little bit easier, and we don't want that. All right, so get to know your oven, use conventional setting, and then the other thing, when I was working on my cookbook, I really played around with the temperature, and I am now only doing 325, which will work at sea level or lower, but really works well here at a higher altitude. So we have a slower time that we're baking at a lower temperature, and that's going to help us create a more flat, even top to our cake, and we'll get rid of that dome. So that's going to help a ton. And then the other fun little tip, if you guys like to make bread, or even if you don't, I want you to get a pizza stone. All right, who picked up sourdough during the pandemic? We did for like a week, and then I killed my starter. It wasn't my thing. All right, I like to eat it. Making it was hard. I couldn't get to it. But that pizza stone, what I want you to do with it is put it on the bottom rack of your oven. And I read this in Bon Appetit magazine years ago, and I've done it ever since. That pizza stone on the bottom rack prevents the heat from rising right underneath your cake to coming around. And that will also help your cake have a more level top. So you'll still get a really beautiful rise, but then we're not getting that dome, which is kind of like a bittersweet moment, because I know with the dome we get to trim it and we get to snack on it, right? And so sometimes when my cakes come out totally flat, I'm like, yes, but also, dang it, how am I gonna sample this cake, especially when it's new? Or Avery will come in and she's like, where are the scraps? I'm like, it baked perfect. What do we do? I'm like, we still are like trimming it a little bit. So, okay, try those tips for your cake layers. The other thing is, once you start making your cake batter, if it is a cake that requires the butter, the sugar, and eggs at the beginning, or maybe it's oil, sugar, and eggs, I want you to spend some time beating those ingredients together on a medium-high speed, like 2 to 3 minutes. You want them to get really smooth in texture, but it also will get lighter in color and a little lighter in texture, like just kind of fluffy looking. So we want that, right? We want that higher speed at the beginning. But once you start adding your dry ingredients at the end, and you're alternating usually with like a buttermilk or maybe a sour cream or a liquid of some kind, we want low speed. Your lowest speed that you can do, just to stir in the dry ingredients without overmixing them. That has 11 leavening agents like your baking powder or your baking soda, whatever you're using. And we don't want to overmix, because that'll cause your cake to be dense or to sink in the oven. So be mindful of that one. Okay, those are kind of the basics with your cake batter. Now let's talk buttercream. So we've done a chocolate buttercream. This one looks really light in color because it's been in the big mixer and mixing a long time. One of the things you're looking for is actually for your buttercream, when you have everything in the mixer and you start mixing it, it's gonna get lighter in color and like fluffier and smoother in texture. So don't be alarmed if you're making a chocolate buttercream and you're like, well, that looks like milk chocolate. Let me assure you, I used dark chocolate, but it did mix for a little while, so it lightens in color. It will darken as it sits back to that kind of darker, richer chocolate color, just so you know. But we use a Calabo. Which one did we use? We have two that we like. So I think in this one, we have the Calabo bittersweet Calettes in here. So I can get a bag of that so you guys can see. We love those. They mix really well for the buttercream, or they melt really well for the buttercream, and we like them for our drip as well. So I can have Heather speak to the exact chips that we're using for the drip and the buttercream. But we do love the dark chocolate or a semi-sweet, because again, we want that flavor, that chocolate flavor, to just stay there and be really, really strong. The other thing we added to this one is some caramel for the Twix. So it's a chocolate caramel buttercream on this one. So yummy. Has anyone made homemade caramel before? If you've made one of my cakes, I bet you have. So easy, right? Okay, and the flavor is so good. I actually like to cook mine a little extra long, so it almost has this like burnt caramel flavor to it, and you add the salt, and it's such a good contrast to all the sweet that you're putting in your cake. So don't be afraid of letting that caramel, when you're making it, get to like this really rich amber color. You almost start to smell, just like the first hint of like, oh, I think it might burn, but just take it off and it'll be so good, so good. So buttercream. We're starting with butter that's not as warm as when we're putting it in our cake layers. We want it a little bit cold. So you could leave it on the counter for a little while, but when you touch it, it can have some cold to it. You can get maybe a thumbprint in it, but it's not super soft. All right? We're gonna soften the texture of the butter by mixing it in your mixer for a couple minutes on its own. Just let that beat the butter. It'll soften. Again, the visual cue, it's getting lighter in color. All right, so that's gonna be super helpful. Yeah.
Is butter all equal?
You know what? No and yes. For cakes, for me, yes. I'm using so much of it. I just get my butter at Costco. But when I make cookies, I go get the European butter for my cookies more often than not, because of the flavor. Like, you can taste the flavor there. Now, it kind of, you don't really get a flavor difference with the cake layers, but if you wanted to use the good butter for your buttercream, that would be the place to use it. If you're using it for a white buttercream and you're doing vanilla and you're trying to get it really white, try to find a butter that's really light in color. So Challenger butter, that is really light in color. Costco I use all the time, but some of those European butters get really yellow, so you may not want to use it for buttercream. So, okay, oh, here's our chocolate chips. That's right. Okay, we've got Guitarred. So those are the ones that we like for the buttercream, and we use them for the drip too. So, and we'll talk about the drip in just a minute, but that's what Carlisle is working on here. So those are our chocolates. Dark. Okay. So buttercream, Slightly cold butter, you're gonna mix that for a few minutes on its own, just get it nice and fluffy and light in texture.
Is that curvature?
Yes. And then you are going to sift your powdered sugar. Don't forget that step. I promise it is worth the extra dirty dish, and it is worth the extra 5 minutes. And can I tell you a funny story? Because what I want you to use when you do it is get like a mesh strainer. Okay, just grab your big mesh strainer, measure your powdered sugar, whisk it through. You will be done in 5 minutes. What I don't want you to use is my friend Rosie, you know Rosie, the first time she made one of my buttercreams, called me and she's like, do I have to sift this? Like, it is taking forever. I was like, Rosie, it's like maybe 10 minutes. What are you using? She's like, I've been at this for 30 minutes. I've never seen or heard of anyone else doing this, so it was a very funny moment. But just to make sure you don't do it, she was using one of the Pampered Chef dusters that you dust your French toast with, and that can maybe fit a half cup of powdered sugar at a time. How many times do you think she used a not okay word with my name while she was doing that? I know she did. We know Rosie, right? Oh my gosh, I was dying. I was like, Rosie, okay, we're gonna just get you a mesh strainer. So now she knows. She has her bowl, she has her whisk. But I can just picture her. You know those friends where you're like, oh, I know exactly what you were saying to me in your head or out loud at that time, and it wasn't nice. But we're okay now. We're still really good friends. So sift your powdered sugar. It's gonna get the clumps out. And then it's just gonna help you get smoother sides when we go to use our scrapers. So it's just gonna make a silkier, smoother buttercream that's easier to work with on the outside. I always like to add heavy whipping cream to my buttercream. So with this one, it's added with the chocolate. You melt it and create a ganache. You add it to your butter, the powdered sugar, and it mixes in great. And then at the very end, after everything's incorporated into your buttercream, just let it mix for a few minutes. 3-ish minutes is great on a higher speed to get it light and fluffy, right? We want a buttercream that doesn't taste like a dense butter when you bite into it, but light and fluffy, and it complements the rest of the cake. So those are some tips for your buttercream. One thing I want to point out, now that we are entering into the winter months, you would think that on rainy days, like on Tuesday, and even yesterday, when was it snowing? Was it snowing yesterday too? Yeah. You would think those days would bring moisture, and they do for Mother Nature outside. For our baked goods, it actually got really dry on Tuesday, and we had cake class, and we were making a Biscoff buttercream, and it had happened before, but we could tell if we used the whole amount of powdered sugar in that batch of buttercream, it was getting dry. It was just like sucking in like a sponge, all the moisture. So what we had to do, if this happens to you and you've added your powdered sugar and it's not silky smooth and it's not easily spreadable, I want you to take, for like a batch of buttercream, which is about 6 cups of buttercream, you're gonna take maybe a 4th cup of butter, and you can even melt it or like just soften it quite a bit and pour that into your buttercream and mix it in. But we're gonna need that fat from the butter to help create some new moisture. So what we did in class is everyone gets their own tub of buttercream in cake class on the hands-on classes. And so I had Lindsay go around with melted butter, and she added like 1 to 2 tablespoons of melted butter to everyone's mixture, and they mixed it together, and it got so much smoother and so much silkier. But you can also kind of see, like after you've added probably 75% of the powdered sugar to the buttercream during these months, you may not need more, so you could even stop. So just look for that. You'll see that it's dry. It kind of like separates in this weird way where you're just like, it's not sticking to things, it's not working. It gets kind of clumpy and airy. It's so off, and I was like immediately like, the rain, crazy town. So okay, let's start to assemble. With our cakes, these are all the like fun tools to have. But I will say, before you get any of the fancy tools, make sure you have good cake pans. That will make a big difference in how your cake layers rise and how they look and how they bake. I love that Fat Daddy-O brand. I think it's fantastic. I have so many of them. That's what they do, is pans. But just make sure you get a good quality pan, lighter color and metal. All right, those darker ones, save for your brownies. Okay, but the light ones we want for our cakes. But you want a pan that knows how to bake a cake, right? It's anodized, which means it distributes the heat really evenly in the pan that you're using while it's in the oven, and that's what we're looking for. All right, so we've got good pans. Now we are using a turntable. This one is a Tico. It's from here at Gigi. It's cast iron. It's 2 pieces. So keep that in mind when you lift it up. You lift it up from the bottom. All right. It comes with this piece of textured plastic that helps to keep our board in place. Yeah, keep this still, right? And then I always like to use 2 cake boards. One is the size of my cake, and one's a little bit bigger, and they're just taped together with a piece of Scotch tape. And I have something to hold on to as I move the cake in and out of the freezer, which are gonna be a few of our steps as we're doing this. And then when I'm ready to serve the cake, when it's all done, just take it off of this. So easy, grab your spatula, lift it up, it'll come right off, okay? And then you won't have the messy board when you're serving. So I like those two. I'm gonna show you how to use the acrylic disc. We've got 2 icing spatulas, a straight one, which is what we use for the sides of the cake, and the offset, which we use for the top and the middle. Yeah, the middle ones. Yep. So that's the crooked one, that's the straight one, and then we have the straight scraper. All right, we're gonna get to those in just a minute, but as we get started, and when you guys are at home making this cake, and again, this is the Twix cake. It's kind of similar. Has anyone made this one or made the better than anything cake? You've made the Twix one. Then there's one that's a better than anything cake, which is the homemade version of the one Mom used to make us growing up with the Cool Whip, but make it homemade with homemade whipping cream and homemade caramel sauce. It'll change your life. And I call it better than anything because the other word, you know, right? Well, it was so funny. I was working on that cake and Weston comes in and I always knew it as, you know, and he comes in the kitchen and he was like, oh, what are you making? That looks so good. I'm like, oh, it's a better than any, or I said better than anything cake is what he was like, what? I'm like, better than anything. Better than anything. I don't know why. I was like saying it to my 13-year-old son at that moment. I was like, I can't use, not going to use that word. Anyway, better than anything, right? That was a good one. All right, so we have, what is she talking about? Okay, so, you're awesome. All right, we're going to start with our offset icing spatula. Now I want you to notice how I'm holding this, okay? We have an overhand grip. Can you see? Overhand. And look where my finger is. It's right here on the blade. We don't want it here. We want it right there on the blade. Did anybody watch Bob Ross growing up paint? I loved watching him. I used to paint, so I just loved watching. And you could always see he had great control over his brush. But as he did, you're also like, it's so light, the way that he is doing that brush stroke with all his happy little trees, right? So I'm like, okay, I want you to imagine you are Bob Ross painting your trees as you're working on your cake. There's control on your brush, on your icing spatula, and it's right here with the finger. But you're not applying a lot of pressure, right? If you notice that your cake is moving around a lot, if the buttercream is just coming out the sides, you might be pushing too hard. Or as you start to do the sides of your cake, you might be pushing too hard. That is an indicator, if your cake is moving around a lot, that you are applying too much pressure. So we're gonna have control the way that we hold our spatulas, but we're not gonna be pushing really hard. So I'm gonna start here, overhand grip, fingers right here on our blade, and you're gonna start with kind of a tilt in your spatula to be able to push the buttercream out over the edge. Now we are going out over and not out to in. This will help us prevent crumbs from coming up into our cake. Now these ones we had to trim a little bit. We did have a little bit of a dome happening today. So we trimmed them to get them pretty flat, but that means now I have exposed crumb on the top. So to ensure I don't get those crumbs in the buttercream, I'm pushing that buttercream out and over, and I'm not coming in like this. Can you see that difference? So push that buttercream out, and then you're gonna start to level out the side of your spatula. Let me show you what I mean. We're not just going flat here. You're at a slight angle. So actually it's just this edge of the spatula that is touching the buttercream. And so you are gonna push that turntable away from you with your free hand, and then you're gonna bring that spatula towards you with your right hand, or it's the opposite if you're left-handed, and it's almost like this half circle. And you can be Bob Ross and just go swoosh, swoosh, like just a light, I can move it, I'm taking some buttercream away, but I'm not taking all the buttercream away, which means I've got the right touch that we have going on there. Now, we are gonna put some Twix in, and Avery was such a good helper and cut those Twix for us. So we're gonna put some of these in, and I would reserve a lot to put on the top of your cake too. Don't put too many or big pieces in here because that'll make it hard to cut. So we're just gonna put a few of our Twix in here. Now, anytime we add any kind of filling like this, especially a cookie crumble, and we're gonna do some shortbread crumbs for our Twix, you are gonna pat them into place, because every layer that you add to your cake as you're stacking should be nice and level. So we're gonna get eye level with each layer. Should have done that with the buttercream, but we're gonna do that now to make sure this looks nice and even. All right, we've got the buttercream, we've got the Twix, and we've got the shortbread. Did I see hand?
Yeah, I have a question about
Yes.
the bread.
Oh, yes, the
Do you
shortbread.
do it from scratch or do you buy it?
I made this, but you can. There's, you know, those Lorraine Lorna Dunes. Yes, you could use those. You could use those in a pinch. I do like making them homemade because you are able to bake them a little bit longer so they hold their crunch a little bit more. But it's a great, I don't have, you know, it's just one less step for you to do.
Okay.
Lorna Dunes. Okay, we're gonna add some of our caramel to the top. Now, I'm just doing a drizzle and I'm not going too close to the edge. I want you to take note of that. When you are making a cake that has a softer filling, this one has got the buttercream. But we just did my cookies and cream cake at Pinner's Conference. If you've ever made my lemon bar cake, those fillings are a little bit softer. They are not gonna hold up the next level of cake, the next layer of cake, without some support from the buttercream. So on my lemon bar cake, you're going to pipe a rim of the lemon buttercream before you add the lemon curd. On the cookies and cream cake, same thing. You will pipe a border, a rim of the cookies and cream buttercream before you add the softer whipped cream cheese and Oreo filling. So that will help support the next layer. So these two layers, first and second, are gonna go top side up and top side up. Because I have trimmed them, I don't want this exposed crumb on the board because it'll just get really stuck and it'll be hard to serve later. But you will see this last one goes top side down. So we're here, and now if you have any big gaps, and this applies more for a cake that has a softer filling, and you get down here and you're like, oh, I can see my compote right here, and there's big holes, I want you to grab your piping bag and fill that in before you go to the next layer of fillings. So that just prevents anything from spilling out the edge. Now, it's also important to note with those softer fillings, like a lemon curd, you don't need a ton of that. I, in my lemon bar cake, will maybe put a 1/3 cup of the lemon curd between the layers, and then I just take a little cute jar and have it next to the cake when I'm serving slices, and I can add some extra lemon curd with each slice for the flavor. But if you overfill it while you're decorating, you are gonna be a building in Los Angeles during an earthquake. It is just gonna go like this, right? It's gonna be so wobbly and it's gonna be really hard to just keep that lemon curd inside. Okay, so again, take the edge of that spatula. I'm pushing the turntable away from me. I'm starting to level this out because we don't want a dome in the center. Not applying so much pressure that I'm taking all that buttercream away, but just gonna level that one out. When you get eye level, we'll add some more of our Twix. And then we're gonna be ready for our crumb coat. So the crumb coat is a thin layer of buttercream that goes around the cake after you're done stacking it. And then it goes into the freezer. And the purpose of the crumb coat is to lock in the crumbs of the cake. Now, one thing to note too, I am working with cake layers that are chilled. So I typically make my cake layers ahead of time before I want to decorate them, like a day or two before. I let them get to room temperature and then I freeze them. So about 30 minutes before I want to start decorating, I'll take them out of the freezer to thaw just a little bit so they're not totally frozen. Because if I start with totally frozen cake layers, it'll start to harden my buttercream. But chilled cake layers just ensure that the crumbs kind of stay in place a little bit more than if they were room temperature cake layers. So that's gonna help you too. All right, so that crumb coat then goes in, the crumb coated cake goes into the freezer for about 10 minutes and then we'll be ready to put that final coat of buttercream on it. But I do not want you to get hung up on how the crumb coat looks. Right now, we're just trying to stack the cake nice and straight. We want it to be as straight as possible. We can fix some unevenness with the acrylic disc in just a little bit. But for now, we just want straight. So I'm gonna kind of push that into place. My cake layers are chilled. And any of these gaps right here, we just add more buttercream right there. So I'm gonna take my straight icing spatula and I load it up. I am not afraid of buttercream. I don't want you to be afraid of buttercream. Get the buttercream on there. And take that spatula and use the whole surface. That's why I made my spatulas the size that they are. It's just like the perfect size. Not too big for your cakes where you feel like you don't have control over them, but not small where you can't actually cover the surface of your cake as you're decorating. So taking that buttercream, straight spatula, same grip. Look at that, overhand finger on the blade. Here's my control. Turntable is still moving away from us as I'm bringing that spatula towards me. Okay, now your crumb coat is gonna be like a semi-naked cake. You will see some cake layer. It does not need to be fully coated. It doesn't need to be totally even. The purpose is to lock in the crumbs. So try to get to the bottom, to the top, the best you can. Now I want to show you how we're going to crumb coat the top so the sides and the top meet and we don't ruin the edge. I don't want you to take your spatula and start doing this with the edge of your cake. You will start pulling up the cake crumbs and you will be so sad, and we don't want sad. Cake is happy, all right? So you're gonna take your spatula, get some buttercream on the top. I notice people in class will put too much buttercream on top. Don't use all your buttercream for the crumb coat. It should be like a cup. That's really like, right? If a batch of buttercream makes 6 cups of buttercream, you have a cup between each of your 8-inch layers, a cup or so, maybe a little bit more for your crumb coat, and then the rest of that is for your final coat of frosting. So we're adding a little bit more on the top, and I want you to notice how I'm pushing that buttercream over the edge of the cake. Using that just nice and flat, just like we did between our cake layers, but notice how that comes around the rim like that, yeah? Now what we're gonna do is take this straight, and you're gonna see as I just hold this in place and I turn my table, how that rim that was hanging over is now this crown on top. It's this beautiful raw edge, which I love that look. You could do that for your cake any day. But if we want to cover the edge really well, or let's say you're doing your final coat of frosting and you don't want to use the acrylic disc like I'm going to show you today, this is a great way to get a good looking edge as well. You're going to take your offset icing spatula, hold it parallel to the top of the cake, and you're just going to let it catch that rim. And it's just going to drag right in and create a great looking edge for you, just like that, without ruining the edge of the cake. Now, you're gonna go home, and I know, because I've done that too, where you're like, that doesn't feel right, I should go like that. And then you like drag it over at an angle. Look at can you see the difference there? If I try to do this, all of a sudden now I'm pulling up my, Avery sees it, so you see it, right? Come on guys, she's 9. You're so awesome. Okay, so look at that. Have that come over the edge. Go around it like that, and then drag that into the center to protect your edges and keep that cleared. All right, good. Okay, through the magic of TV, we're gonna swap this one out. I'm actually gonna hand it to the girls so they can start cutting it. If we wanna throw on some more buttercream, you can take some buttercream in. No, just, you know what, you can just put it out on the counter because we'll start cutting that for us. Yeah, yeah. Okay. And actually, I'm gonna pull out, will you grab the other one, Whitney, so I can start to thaw? Okay, so that goes into the freezer for about 10 to 15 minutes. You don't wanna leave it in there super long because we don't want it to get so cold where it starts to really freeze my buttercream as I start to work with it, but 10 to 15 minutes should be great. You're gonna put the acrylic disc right on top of the crumb coated cake, all right? Now from here, what's that? Oh, we're gonna add so much buttercream, it's crazy. So from here though, I want you to take a look at your cake, and I want you to look for 2 things. Is it straight? Or is it a leaning tower of Pisa? Because we can fix that, but I want you to find that angle, all right? So when you do, if it's not straight, you're gonna shift the way that your acrylic disc goes on top. Right now, mine's going right on top in the center of the cake. If your cake is leaning a little bit, let's say it's leaning towards the right, I want you to shift the acrylic disc over to the left. So it would come over here, okay? And this is my drawing for us to look at. So your acrylic disc comes over here, the edge of the disc matches and meets up with the bottom of the cake right here. So you're gonna have more buttercream right there and less right here, but it's gonna look straight, okay? And at that point, we kind of rely on the naked eye. You're gonna rely on the top of this and then just visually, how does that look straight? So on that side, the disc comes to the edge, not as much buttercream here, more down here. Make sense? Yes, okay. So then the top, sometimes we look at it and we're like, oh, I thought I stacked it so straight, it's a little bit tilted. What you're gonna do to fix that is if you have your cake, okay, mine's a little bit lower there. Just gently start to place your finger on the acrylic disc, and as you apply just a little bit of pressure, you can lift it up to be level with the higher side. To keep it there, you're gonna take your buttercream and you're just gonna push a little bit of that buttercream underneath, a little bit further under the acrylic disc. Can you guys see that? I don't know if the light is kind of glaring too much, but if you came up here, you'd see there's some buttercream under there kind of propping up that side to get that nice and level. Now I'm ready to add buttercream to the rest of the cake. And I like to go around the top of the cake first. And I'm gonna lock in the disc, meaning it's touching the buttercream. You see how that is just connected right there? There's no gaps. That is what we're going for. We've got that straight spatula, and you're gonna apply the buttercream to the sides here. Now, you're going a little bit beyond the cake disc. So let me show you an example. I'm gonna scrape this really light. Are you guys able to see how I can very much see the acrylic disc right there? But right here, you can kind of see it, but there's buttercream over it. This is what we're going for. We wanna coat the cake in enough buttercream that we have buttercream to move when we're using our scraper. I'll show you that in just a minute. But right here, this is where I wanna then fill in, and I'm gonna go straight down from there. So when I say the acrylic disc is your guide, that is your guide for your straight sides, because now you're gonna work your way down from that point and fill in the rest of the cake and make sure that you have enough buttercream all the way down the cake. You are going over your 8-inch cake board, or maybe you're making a 6-inch cake board. Guess what? The acrylic disc is bigger than that. This is 8 1/4 inch. Your board underneath it is just 8 inches. So you need to go over it. We're gonna cover it so we don't have to see that. That also means you don't have it there to rely on. Because if you did, your cake would look like that. So this is gonna rest against the acrylic disc, and then you're just gonna use the naked eye to make sure that looks nice and straight. All right. Whew, okay, got 14 minutes. It's go time. All right, no pressure. We're gonna see how quick. All right, my buttercream's a little bit soft because we did have to add some extra chocolate and butter because it was a little dry today. So we are almost ready to scrape. And you are good to go on scraping when you look at your cake at eye level. So get down in that squat or that lunge. And I want you to turn around. You don't turn around the cake, turn the cake around. All right? So turn the cake around on the turntable. And I want you to look at the sides. And I want you to determine if they look fairly straight. This is gonna help a ton in using the scraper on this next step, because now we'll just be smoothing it rather than trying to make it really even. So start with a lot of buttercream, try to get it as even, as straight as possible. It's gonna look messy, that's okay. We're gonna smooth it out, okay? So almost like, I feel like we have to rename the scraper to the smoother. Because sometimes when we say scraper, I think people are like, oh, I gotta scrape it, I gotta push really hard. We don't wanna do that. We don't wanna push really hard. Again, it's that light touch, think Bob Ross, right? We've got some control, but it's more about the angle that you do it at and the amount of pressure that you apply to get those smooth sides. So first of all, our grip, okay? I'm using one of my scrapers. It's 8 inches tall. It's 4 fingers on the top. It's a really light material. It's aluminum. We've coated it with rose gold. But when you're looking for a scraper, if you're not getting mine, go get the Atico one. That is $3. It's not as tall, but it's really lightweight and really thin. And that's gonna help you achieve smooth sides. That's gonna be a big helper for you, rather than using an acrylic one or one that's metal and a little bit heavier. Do you need some of this? I just need a little bit for the top, and then you can frost. Are you gonna frost the other cake for us? Yeah. Thanks, that's great. Okay, because I've got the piping back today. Perfect. Okay, so here's my grip. Okay, I'm not tight. Look, happy hands, happy fingers, not mad fingers, happy fingers. Okay, now hopefully you can see this angle. I like to think of my turntable like a clock. So if I'm standing at 6 o'clock and you guys are at 12 o'clock right here, my hands, as I'm right-handed, are together at 2 o'clock is where I'm starting. Look at the angle there. Can you see that angle? We are not here. Don't go there. That perpendicular is just gonna scrape and pull and create so many problems for you. Do you see how much closer that angle is? Too close. Then the surface of the scraper is touching the buttercream and just pulls at it and creates all these holes. So you have the edge of the scraper touching the buttercream, it's touching the acrylic disc, and it's at this 45-degree angle. Now, the left hand goes from 2 o'clock to do all the work. And then it's gonna come meet up with my right hand, which finally decides to move when it hits about 3 o'clock and they cross over. Okay? So I didn't take away a ton of buttercream right there. And I'm doing that full circle so that I only have one scraper line, all right? Now, I could start filling in right now, but I think I've got enough buttercream still on my cake to work with. My goal is not to have to come back and keep adding buttercream to the sides. I wanna use what I have to fill in those gaps. Now notice where my eye is. I am focused on the scraper. I am focused on that looking as straight as possible. Look how I tuck my elbow in to make sure I maintain that angle. Do you see that? I don't want that wrist to flare. Now look, I filled in some of those spots. I didn't take away a ton of buttercream. Now as I get more and more even, without as many gaps, I'm gonna start to go lighter with my touch to just smooth out any of those little spots. Now, I'm actually looking at a scraper and there's a couple spots on the side of my cake where my scraper is not touching my cake, like touching the buttercream. So I may need to add a little bit there. But it's going. I might do one more time. Now, when you're doing this part, this is gonna be fun. I want you to set a timer at home, okay? So you pull your cake out of the freezer from the crumb coat portion, and you're gonna set your timer for 15 minutes. Yay, okay? Now, sometimes in class, people kind of freak out, especially in our hands-on classes, but guess what? I set the timer. And I say to them, I want you to fill and smooth your sides within 15 minutes. And they are like, that is impossible. And I was like, it's not impossible, because what I want you to do is after 15 minutes, find your good sides. And then I want you to be able to walk away. After 15 minutes of decorating and smoothing, your crumb coat, this is a big deal, starts to thaw. And it will start to stick to your acrylic disc. Then we're gonna refreeze this because we wanna cut the acrylic disc off to get a really sharp edge. And when we take the cake out, if the crumb coat has thawed and it's stuck to the disc, we take it back out. Guess what? It rips up half the cake.
You have a sweatshirt that says my good
Oh,
side.
I do. I have she's my salesperson also. I do have a sweatshirt that says my good side. So when you see that, this is what I'm talking about. I want you to find your good side and walk away. And we all have a good side after 15 minutes. I have taught a lot of classes and I promise you that is the case. We also all have a bad side. I've made so many cakes and not a single cake do I think is perfect all the way around. There's always a spot where I'm sitting there like, do I go back over it? Should I just do one more time? But I know from personal experience that that one more time I think I'm gonna do to make it perfect messes something else up, and I go down this spiral of doing that over and over again, and then it's been an hour and I'm crying and no, we're not here to cry unless it's like happy tears, because I have cried over cake that tastes so good that I have gotten tears from it. So those tears are okay, but like frustration tears, this is not what cake is about. It's happy tears. It was so fun in class the other day, the in-person classes. So there's like 16 people per class. So I try to go around and help everyone. We talk about the cake together, we check it out, and we're talking about the good side. I'm like, find your good side, okay? Timer's up. And I walk over, I'm like, all right, let's see it. And she's like, look, it's right there. Her fingers were spread apart 4 inches. And she looked at me, there's my good side, do you see it? And she was so excited. And right there, in that 4-inch space, was a beautiful part of her cake. But she like took that to heart and she's like, all right, that's my good side. I'm gonna focus on that right there. She could have sat and looked at the other side or the other 90% of it and been so upset or frustrated. But she found her good side and she's like, all right, there it is. And you're gonna get better with every cake. That 4.5-inch spot, I bet on her next cake, or her 4-inch was probably 5 inches the next time. And then it was 6 inches, right? So we're gonna find our good side, walk away. I'm gonna let this be, all right? There's my good side. I'm only showing the good side. We're gonna move it away. You just stand behind your cake the whole party, okay? No one needs to go to the back of the turntable. All right, so that cake goes into the freezer for about 10 to 15 minutes. Doesn't need to be super long, but what it's gonna allow us to do is like cut the buttercream away from the disc. Now the goal here is we're gonna use a small, sharp knife. I'm just clearing this out because you know what? I like to see the knife underneath the acrylic disc. I want you to look at that next time you're doing this, if you're gonna use the acrylic disc. So we're gonna put our blade right under the acrylic disc, and you want to be able to see the knife. Do not let it get lost in buttercream. Now, if it's a little cold, mine is still pretty cold, you are gonna be maybe using a little bit more effort. I don't want your knife to go too far under. Ooh, I'm gonna crack that just because let me redo this real quick. Okay, because your knife starts to thicken sometimes back here, so we just wanna keep kind of the thinnest part underneath the disc, but you should be able to see that blade, and you are gliding that blade around the acrylic disc. Now I do think towards the end it's helpful to kind of just put your hand there so it doesn't pop away, but if you're doing this and your buttercream starts to crack, your cake is probably too cold. So I would let it sit out for a minute, or I would put your knife under hot water. See, and this wants to already pull away. Here we go, we're good. Okay, so look at our edge, right? So good, minus where I had to pull the knife out. All right, now we're just gonna add a little bit more buttercream to the top. And this is where we even that out. So if we did have an edge that was uneven or a little higher than the other, now this is gonna be nice and connected. So just get that towards the edge. Don't need it to go over the edge too much. And then level that out in the center. I had one little spot I had to fill in over here. So because our cake is chilled, it's kind of easy to just blend that into the side there. And if you have any buttercream that came over the edge, just gently run one of your spatulas around on it. And then we'll just drag that buttercream in. And now we're gonna be ready for our drip. So the drip is made with our dark chocolate that we love so much and some heavy whipping cream. It is room temperature. We don't want it too hot. Right. We make a mess up here, don't we, Aves? All right. Okay. Did you hear what she said? You're not doing it right if you're not making a mess. We can thank Duff Goldman for that one because he gave my kids liberty to just throw powdered sugar everywhere, right? It was, we used to watch Kids Baking Championship all the time, and he was on there, right? Do you guys watch that? Have you watched that at all? It's so darling. It's so fun. And,
Mom,
yeah.
on that, there's a picture of us in the cookbook of them just
Oh, yes.
powdered sugar.
Avery's telling you to go look at my cookbook if you don't have it already. Buy it, and then open up the page and find Weston doing this with powdered sugar. It was his Duff Goldman or LeBron James moment where he's just like, all right, the drip with the drip bottle. I always cut my drip bottle opening just a little bit so I can have a slightly larger drip coming down. Start on the back side, but here's the deal. You're holding this at an angle so it spills over the edge of the cake like a waterfall. You're applying pressure the whole time to the bottom. That's not changing. The only thing that changes is that you are pushing the turntable away from you and moving the drip bottle. All right? So I'm gonna give it a little test run here. Let's see. Okay, I didn't put too much pressure there. I held it there for just a second or so, and that drip is moving pretty quick. So I'm not gonna need to hold it in place for very long. I'm just gonna get going, all right? But I am holding that drip bottle on the edge of the cake pretty much the whole time. So even where it's like not dripping, you get some of that chocolate. All right. And because your cake is chilled, oh, look at this little guy. Okay, we're gonna try to avoid that because you can't go back over it again. So I would rather my drip come all the way down to the bottom of the cake. I'm usually doing it more for like more flavor, right, than decorating, but decorating too. Like I'd rather have more of the drip come down because you can't really go back over it because it has chilled and you'll be able to tell. Let's see if we can blend it in. You might be able to see this. Like it will, yeah, you'll get a bump. That one wasn't too bad, but I would try not to go back over the drips because you'll be able to tell that you did. You're welcome. This is a chocolate extravaganza, my friends. All right, let's just add some more of that chocolate on top. Gentle as it gets around to the edge. And then we could just do some fun piping. I'll just do something really quick because I know I'm out of time. But we are passing out the cakes. Should I do the braid? Okay, Aves has requested the braid. So we are gonna take, now don't ever pipe too close to the edge, right? Start away from the edge, far enough. So we're just doing this little shell technique, but we've angled it in towards the center of the cake. And now we're just gonna create X's as we do this. I got 1 minute. All right. Now it would be helpful too, if your drip still feels kind of wet on the top of your cake, I would freeze your cake for 5 minutes, let that set up, and then your piping will kind of stay into place. Much easier too. All right, and then any other leftover fillings, we're gonna just take and let those be our sprinkles for the cake. And there's our Twix cake. Voila, bon appetit. Thank you. So try this milk chocolate cake. You'll see it with my malt chocolate cake with my Better Than Anything cake, with the Twix cake. But then also, for comparison to see what you like more, try the dark chocolate cake, which you'll see with basically every other chocolate cake on my blog and in my website, or in my cookbook. So all my products are out there. The book is out there. The cake flour that I worked on with Lehigh Mills, which I'm always using cake flour in my recipes, probably 75% of the time, is out there as well. So you'll see that. And thanks so much, you guys, for coming. Yes, questions? Yes, ma'am.
This calls for cooking vinegar.
For
Cooking vinegar.
yes, just a little white vinegar to activate the yep. All right. Now I think. Oh, more questions. Thank you. Okay, so I do both because I offer the grams in my cookbook and my website, but typically I'm just using measuring cups. I think it's just because I'm so more familiar with that, even just from growing up rather than the years of the blog. So just make sure you measure the right way when you're doing measuring cups. You're always fluffing up the flour with a fork or a whisk. Spoon it into your measuring cup with a spoon and level it off with a knife. Just don't dip and shake. You'll get way too much flour. But if you're measuring that way with just the measuring cups and not the scale, there should be equal amounts as the scale. Yeah. Yes.
What are you baking? When you make your shortbread cookie clusters, what temperature?
Is that not in there?
It doesn't say the temperature that I see. These are the instructions on the.
I think is it 325 or 375?
325.
Okay, 325.
This cake is coming out right now. It's very cold.
Oh, okay.
Told me to tell you that.
Okay. The cake that's coming out right now, the next one is still pretty cold, which Heather loves. She's probably so happy. She loves a cold cake. I like to serve my cake room temperature for you to know the actual texture and flavor of the cake. So that's one thing to keep in mind too. If you're serving your cakes cold and you're like, oh, it doesn't feel very fluffy, that's why. It's cold. So you can make your cakes ahead of time like we did, freeze them, just bring them back to room temperature before you serve. I should get a picture of that, right?
That's so
Okay,
great.
Linz, will you take a picture of Avery and me up here?
Yes.
Okay, I would love that so much. Hold on, where's our good side? I think it's right there, right? Look, my thumb just goes
Do you want me
right
to
there.
come from
There's our
here?
good side. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, you gonna get up here? Can we see Avery over the cake?
Yes. So cute.
Thank
Check it out,
you.
make sure.
All right. As long as I don't have a double chin and my eyes are open. Yay!
So cute.
Avery looks miniature next to the cake. Can you guys see that a little bit? The cake is as big as Avery. All right, you ready to take this one?
Yep.
So if you don't want your cake cold, by the way, if you're eating it and you're like, oh, this still feels cold, we can put plastic wrap on it and you guys can wait a little bit.